This was a tough one. This was one of the more challenging ones I've done because I have to admit to being a fan of the X5, and over 4 generations, there is one engine that stands out that you would buy, but times have changed, things have changed, and the way these cars have been kept is probably going to be one of the biggest factors. Let's get into the video. If you do hear any odd noises in this one, just so you know, we're looking after my in-law's dog at the moment. He's sat just down there. So if you hear any odd noises, it's not me salivating over the idea of one of these particular X5 models. It is him, although it could be me. Let's start with the E53 generation. So this is the first one. Is it E53? I hope I'm right in there. Maybe I've got it wrong. E53, pretty sure. Yeah. This is the first generation of the X5. It goes without saying, there's a 3 litre diesel. Okay, so it came with a 3 litre diesel, and this is where BMW's shift as a brand really happens. So prior to this, what they're known for, rear drive, petrol engine, straight six, balanced chassis, great driving dynamics. That was what BMW were, and that's what their fans expected to see from them. And similar to some other brands at the time who needed to increase sales, but also new times were shifting. And there was one of two ways things were going to go. You could adapt or be left behind. And I have to be fair to BMW at the very start here, they made one of the better tactical moves, I think, of all manufacturers in the most trade, because they had bought Rover because they wanted the mini brand, and from there they gained Land Rover, and they developed the first generation the first generation X5 with the third generation L322 Range Rover. Now, the cars were built to be distinctly different, but there is some crossover, and in understanding better how a Land Rover worked, they could make a BMW that they wanted. There's a critical thing here, because they could have just got the Range Rover Sport that came out in 2005. They could have seen that coming and said, oh, let's just do our own version. We'll stick a BMW badge on the front of it, and we'll just do a kind of Range Rover Sport, but we'll call it the BMW X5. And they didn't. They said, well, for a start off, we don't want to make a sport utility vehicle or a 4x4. So SUV, 4x4, we don't want to be in that market. We want to be in the sport activity vehicle market, which a phrase they coined and didn't make a lot of sense to many people at the time, calling your vehicle a SAV, but it worked because they said, look, we're building a car, and it isn't going to be this off-road, monster that's going to be able to climb everything, but it is going to drive like many people know a BMW does drive, and it's also going to be an SUV that you can get out of a car, get into, and still feel like you're driving a car. It's taken some manufacturers decades to get to that point. It really has. But we'll stick with the engines for a moment. And on that first generation, not only did they bring in this SUV or SAV, they also said, well, for America, it would work with a V8. You put a V8 in it. Americans have been used to large displacement V8, V6 engines in SUVs for quite a long time, or some straight sixes as well. The European market just wasn't going to take that up to such a high degree, especially because at the time there was some concentration on lowering CO2 emissions, and diesel technology had already been identified in the sort of the late 90s as the way to do it for Europe. So in comes a 3 litre straight six diesel engine, and if you get one on 01 to 03, it's a little bit less powerful, but and by the way, if you want specifics on all of this, there is a buyer's guide for the first generation, second generation, and the third generation X5 on the channel, so you can check that out afterwards. But the diesel engine really changed the dynamics of what it meant to own one of these larger vehicles in Europe, and to an extent in the other markets that it was sold in, because you could have acceptable fuel economy, good performance, not too bad of a sound. Okay, it wasn't a straight six petrol, but didn't sound too bad. And you could all have it all in a package that suddenly was becoming really desirable for people. So if on this early one you can find 3 litre diesels, now they are better in 04 to 06. There's just some revisions that are made. They're a little bit more powerful. They go down the road a little bit better. But what you've got happening throughout the X5 lifespan from 2001, 2005, 2010, 2015, 2020 is an increase in emissions regulation. Okay, and that is slowly taking away both the diesel advantage and the ability for a diesel engine to do what it does best. As we go through the generations, you'll see me sort of saying this, that the advantage diesel has in this first generation is quite colossal. Then we move on to the second, the third, the fourth generation, and it starts to tip off. But here's the bit that's going to sound the odd part, and it's what made this video so hard to make. As a used buy, the 3-litre diesel may not be the one. And you know, I sold these back in the day as sort of, they were used at the time. I think the newest ones were like a couple of years old when I first went into the motor trade, but they have come to a point now where even the newest ones are basically 20 years old. And in that 20 years, they have lived a life. And I can tell you that because a few years ago I thought, I wonder what a first generation, I think I was just before I bought the Range Rover that I had, and I thought, I wonder what the X5 is like. You know, and to be honest, I was more tempted by the petrols, but I thought, you know, great diesel engine, reliable, that will still be going well today. And you look at them on the used market. Now again, I go into great detail on this on the buyer's guide, but just to sort of highlight it, it isn't so much the engine, it's the rest of the car. And the diesel one particularly seems to be the one that people have bought, and they just haven't spent the money as time has gone on, once the car's got to 10, 12, 15 years old. Whereas when you look at the petrol engines, now the 3-litre I, which is sort of the direct competitor for the diesel, for some of you won't have the diesel, so that will be the entry model. And that one actually is a really stout engine. It's fitted across the BMW range. It does have a few little issues, it's not perfect, but if it's got this far, okay, if it's got 20 years to its 20th birthday, it's probably going to get to its 30th. That's kind of the way you can look at things on this. Cars you have a lifespan. I remember speaking to a colleague about this once, and we had always been told by the manufacturer lifespan 8 years. So they don't expect to see a car back in the dealer, for a service after 8 years. And that was kind of total lifespan. We knew cars carried on past that, but there was these sort of two things. If you go to a supermarket, you have a sell by date and a use by date, or eat by date, whatever it might be. And the sell by date was kind of 8 years, if you like. So we wouldn't see it back in the dealer. The eat by date, so it's the date when we really did expect them to be gone, was 12 years. You'll find 3-litre diesels with that same view. The trouble is, as I say, it's the rest of the body. With the 3-litre, they probably haven't done the mileage. And people have probably been told at the 7-8 year mark that the value of the vehicle is not that high. So you've got two options. You sell it, or if you want to keep it, do the work to it and then keep it. And it's why on the used market you actually can find quite a good number of 3 litres, that 3-litre petrol, so 3-litre I, that is in good shape. I would avoid the 4.4 V8. No particular, like, again, you can go into the guide for the particular reasons and everything like that, but nothing that I'm going to bring up here. It's just for the package you're getting on the 3 litres today, the 4.4, it's not giving you a huge advantage unless it's something you want to collect. Of course, if you want to collect it, it's completely different. If it's a 4.4 and you want the first sort of V8 X5 and you want to put it in your garage or your collection, that's a completely different story. However, the reason I say 4.4 is kind of off to the side is because BMW wouldn't do a proper M model for this first generation. They do in the second. We go to the X5M, X6M, but this first generation doesn't get that. So what we got instead was the 4.6 IS, 4.8 IS, and I still remember, because I'd only worked in the automotive trade for a few months max, being sent out in a 4.6 IS, and I knew it felt different to anything else I'd driven at that point. And bear in mind, a few months in the motor trade, that's a lifetime of car driving for most people, because you're in and out of cars every single day, driving them, test driving them, and people, etc., etc. But it's stuck in my mind ever since, and I've driven the 4.8s, and the 4.8s are the 4.8s feel like BMW made the car. Okay, the 4.6 IS feels like BMW built an X5 and then knocked on the door of some guys who were attached to their building and said, look, we've got an X5, I don't suppose you could M it up a bit, could you? And that's what they did. And it's very rare manufacturers do this, but when you can buy something that feels like the manufacturer modified it and then put a warranty on it, you get what the best aftermarket builders in the world would build. Okay, the ones that are not trying to do anything at SEMA or some sort of big automotive sort of incredible creation. They're just trying to enhance it that little bit, make it something that the manufacturer could have done but didn't. And that's what the 4.6 IS feels like. So if there is one and you're just into the power, you don't mind too much about maintenance, 4.6 IS. You can go 4.8, but the 4.6, it just feels that little bit different. And I know some people might think, oh, I don't want a car that feels slightly unfinished, slightly modified, slightly not, like everyone's gone round it and fine-tuned everything. And it's just because you don't get it very often. Now, if you want that fine-tuning feel though, 4.8. Okay, so really I'd say split the middle. If you want to go for something that you're going to run every day, 3-litre diesel will do the job only if it's got a phenomenal maintenance history, and a lot of them haven't, a lot. 3-litre I, again, they could follow the same problem. However, today, at least you're not going to be dealing with emissions equipment, or assuming it's had a new catalytic converter at some point, you're probably not going to deal with emissions equipment. You're probably not going to have to deal with any major components like a turbocharger that you'd have to in the diesel. If you then want power, I'd just move past the 4.4, and if you can find a 4.6, it's probably been enthusiast owned, which means it's probably had lots of money spent on it along the way. It's not always the case. Some of them have not had that. But of course, the 4.8, if you want the final best finished of it, then that is the one. But the 4.6, it gets overshadowed by the 4.8. I think it is worth, it's worth just that, it's worth a little look at, a little test drive, if you can find one, and if it's in good shape. Moving on to the second generation, this is the E70. It's the second generation, it's the tough follow-up act, but again, 3-litre diesel. I think you can buy it 30D, 35D, 40D. Might not be a 35, can't quite remember. I'm trying to do all this off the top of my head, so you'll have to forgive me if I get one or two small bits wrong, but the 3-litre diesel in this, I'd actually try and get a 40D if you can. It does almost everything. It is powerful. It's got torque delivery from almost nothing, and I'm talking more about the 40D, sorry. The 30D does need a little bit to get going, but the 40D, it just, I don't know, they did an amazing job. It's probably peak diesel at that point. That's sort of 2007, 8 going into 2011, 12. That marker, that period of time, especially if you're in Europe, that is the sort of peak time. I think the Aussies got some of them as well. Aussies and New Zealanders, shouldn't forget you out down there. If you're US, Canada, I don't think on that generation you had any of the diesels, but you can correct me if I'm wrong. But yeah, that again can fall into the same problem that the first generation does, and it's that the majority of those are 15 to 20 years old and they've been used. Okay, do they have some life left in them? From an engine standpoint, almost definitely. The rest of the car, though, sometimes when people have bought it with that engine, they've bought it with maybe a little bit of a budget mindset. So you've got to be careful which one you go for. And it's why I would be more tempted by a 40D, where someone has gone out and said, I want to spend more money on this car, because they've possibly also been willing to spend a bit more money on it. It's not always the case, but that would be, out of the two, that would be the way I'd go for, the way I'd go. I'd avoid all of the V8s. Okay, these are cars that I refer to as ROW, so it's run or warranty, because they're just the N63 on that early one, and the S63 on the early one. Just no, just avoid it. Okay, just avoid it. Too many bills going on. Just avoid it. You're better off if you want that. You've got, I think it's the N55 3-litre petrol, good performer. It can take a tune if you want to increase the horsepower a little bit. It can take it. It doesn't have, because it's a petrol engine, it doesn't have some of the finer emissions equipment that the diesel had to have. So again, that should keep some of the costs down. But things like turbos and stuff will start to cause issues. The one thing I would say though is that six-cylinder BMW engines, if we're looking at 0 mileage, okay, from brand new, I'm surprised whenever they don't get to 200,000 miles. I really am. If they've maintained, they should be, and that's, sorry, if you're watching this and you deal with kilometres more, then that's what, 350,000 kilometres. You know, to me, that's a six-cylinder BMW engine should get there. Okay, it may take some maintenance along the way, but it should. Okay, so if you're buying below that sort of mileage, then you know, as long as it's had money spent on it, you should be okay. Moving on to the next generation, I've only just finished the buyer's guide for the F15 generations. It's F15 if it's X5, F16 if it's X6. Two really interesting. This is probably I think it's a fairly short run actually. It gets 2013 to 2018, and something starts to happen in this generation. Okay, it's a good look at in my view. I actually really like this generation of X5, but you can tell there's a disturbance, going on, and it's happening throughout the car trade. But this car sits right in the middle of it because it's made at the start to the end of this sort of big disturbance, and it's electrified powertrains, hybrid powertrains, the turn away from diesel, or the sort of negative view that people then start to have of diesel, and the reliability and fuel economy of petrol engines increasing. So there's a real sort of step change that's going on, and especially under BMW, because BMW are aware, they've made at this point the i3 is coming out, they can do the i8, so they are aware that they're going to have some sort of hybrid or EV type car available. Okay, whether it will be all of their lineup, half of their lineup, a quarter of their lineup, it's clear no one's 100% sure. But from an X5 point of view, you can tell at the start they were thinking, okay, this vehicle will probably have to at some point go hybrid, and so it comes out with the 3-litre diesel, and again, emissions equipment. These cars will be sort of around 10 years old now. So it's emissions equipment usually that's the problem, and it's usually just a case of get a new DPF filter, refill the DEF or blue AdBlue tanks, or take care of some software issues. But as an overall rule, they have become more restricted. Okay, in this generation, they do start getting that sort of lockdown of what they can actually pump out of the exhaust, and with that comes some compromises for power. And I'm talking about the jump here. If you look at first generation to second generation, there is a clear evolution of that diesel in the way of offering more power, better fuel economy, better torque, better low down power, better rev range, all these sort of things. When you go into the third generation, yes, there is an improvement, but it's not that sort of bigger step up that we see from first to second generation. When you go from, say, a 30D to a 40D, or a first to a second generation, you know it. Second generation to third generation, unless you go to they have an M50D, which they only sold to a few countries, so you're probably not looking at that one, but that is a big step up. Again, got a load of fine tuning from BMW. So 3-litre diesel, yeah, you can go for that one. Yeah, so that's a good shout. The 3-litre petrol is probably one of the engines that impresses me the most, but it has a bit of a battle going on its hands from 2015 because the hybrid comes out, and BMW are clearly very interested in getting the hybrid sold, and it didn't necessarily work. If you go on the used market today, depending on what country you're in, okay, so you might be in Europe, you might be North America, you might be obviously the Aussies and the New Zealanders, South Africans, I know you watch the channel as well, and across the world. And I can see, who watches this channel. So you would have all got sort of slightly different options, variations, trim, and engines given to you. But there is a move here where the hybrid sort of gets put in, and people are a bit wary of it. So if you look on the used market for whatever place you are, you'll probably find, you can find them, but not as much as you can find that 3-litre petrol. And that creates sort of a two-way street on what to do. Because if you're going one way and you say, well, I want to have something that I want to keep for, say, 10 years, and I'm not sure if I'll have to have some form of hybrid vehicle to drive it around a nearby city. You know, maybe they say, oh, you have to be on the electric to drive in the city. So in which case, yeah, your mind's going to move more towards that. If you live anywhere else, then the 3 litre, unless it's done colossal mileage, doesn't have a good service history, or hasn't been maintained. You can usually tell that with a vehicle. I did a video a while back on some of the things you don't get told when you buy a car, and just there's some ways that you can walk around and say, oh, you know, you can run I gave the example in that video. Run your back of your hand along the side of the car, okay, along the side of it, along the bonnet, and you can generally feel if an area has been heavily polished, and that usually means that it's had a repair. So there's other things to think about with these, but with the 3 litre petrol on that generation, yeah, it could well be the pick over the diesel coming towards the later years, and only because, as I say, there was just more concentration on restricting the diesel, restricting it, and the buyers who got them were then being told, oh yeah, well, it's now failed its emission test, so it will need, you know, a new DPF filter. It will need a new EGR valve, you know, or whatever it might be. And people don't want to pay it. And so they start ripping stuff off. They want to get more performance out of it, which will obviously reduce the longevity of the engine. It's not how it was originally engineered to be. All that sort of stuff. I know a lot of people have very strong views on this. That's absolutely fine. I'm sticking with a standard car here, because you just see it too often. Stuff gets ripped off of cars because, you know, it breathes better without it. But you have to do a lot of, you know, you have to put a lot of thought into the engineering that went behind making it work with it that you've now just taken off. So 3 litre diesel, 3 litre petrol. Okay, you can, if you want a V8, if you want big power on this generation, you can go for the X5 X6M, because that S63 engine around 2015, it might be a bit before that, it might be 2014, it basically gets a big revision. So the F10 M5 comes out, and it's got some problems, and well-documented problems. And the X5M with the same engine, well-documented problems. You don't have to look very far, you'll find them. This second generation BMW new, we can't lose that customer base. Those are people spending big money, clearly a BMW enthusiast, or at least loyal to the brand. If they're going to come back and trust us to buy a second X5M or M5, or, you know, maybe it's their 5th M5, we need to make some big changes. And they did for the M5, the N63, though it takes a bit longer for them to really get the fine tuning right. The S63 is much better, much better. So yeah, if you want big power, maybe you want a bit of a collector SUV, you can do it on this generation. I'd avoid it on the second generation, but on the third you should be okay. Then we've got the last generation, the G05 or G09? G05, G06, G06 I think it is. Well, you'll know anyway. I don't have any screens in front of me, and it's completely left my mind. I'm trying to hold so much up here right now that we get into this generation, 4th generation, so 2019 model years, and there's a step change. Okay, so it's built from late, I think 2018, 2019, 2020. 2020 is the last year of the M50D being offered to any country. So BMW just accept it. That era, that sort of window of time when high horsepower diesel was a really appealing idea, is gone, and they take it away. The 3 litre diesel remains, but it now comes up against the 3 litre B58. If you don't know anything about the B58, that's the engine that went in the Toyota Supra and Z4 collaboration. It's an engine that was co-designed between BMW and Toyota. It has a big amount of headroom, and you know, so when I don't know if it's Toyota or BMW, I would assume it's more Toyota that said, we know if we put this in a Supra, someone's going to put it on a dyno, they're going to run X amount of power from it, and then they're going to start putting big exhausts and, you know, whatever other modifications on it, and they want more power. So we need to build it to be able to take it. Because if a Supra is blowing up every other day because people can't run more power, it doesn't follow the legacy of the car. So the B58 now, BMW put it in almost everything. It's reliable, powerful, reasonably efficient. You know, for this type of engine, it's very efficient. For this type of engine, it's not a hybrid 1.8, but for a 3 litre straight six, it's efficient. And they, offer it in this generation paired with a hybrid. Okay, so you can have 480-ish brake horsepower combined between the electric motor and a 3-litre V58 engine. If you were designing a car that's sort of got to be the complete package for everyone, powerful, good to drive, family car, you can fit, adults in it in the back, and isn't going to break the bank on fuel economy, is always going to, be able to make an overtake if you need it, and is going to sort of fulfill the enthusiast side while also being able to be just plugged in and driven, say, 10 miles to work on electric and 15 kilometers back, if that's how you live your life, with a bit of metric and a bit of imperial, but be able to drive back on electric too. It answers so many questions. The diesel is still there, and it's still, I think, up to 2021, still a promising buy. You can see the shift happening. Okay, you can see the shift. On the third generation, they offered a 2-litre diesel engine to some countries, the 25D, and you could see how BMW were thinking. They were like, well, maybe we can move the market into our smaller diesel engines for this, for the X5, and that would bring in itself just a big reduction in emissions. Because if you go from 3 litres to 2 litres and the market will accept it, then that car has suddenly become a lot more efficient. I mean, if you can call it an X5 30, Audi do this with their the new badging scheme, where you used to have 2 litre TDI, 3 litre TDI, 2 litre TFSI, 3 litre TFSI, all that sort of stuff, and now they just put it into power band badging, 35, 45, 55, 60, all that sort of stuff, just to tell you horsepower, and it means they have more flexibility over the engine. And BMW do this, BMW badged, so the M340i doesn't have a 4 litre in it. It has this V58 3 litre in it. So I think BMW had a way they thought they might be able to keep the diesel, but realistically, people want the longevity, they want the performance, and they're willing to go for a bit of fuel economy for the smoothness. So if you want the latest generation, you can go and get a diesel. And if you can get one like 3 years old, you'll probably have a good buy, because you can keep that for 10 years. Just keep it well maintained, and you can just keep it, and it will do everything. You can kind of tell the sort of mindset behind the engineering of everything was looking more towards away from diesel technology and towards hybrid technology. And that is the complete difference to how we started this story with the X5, where it was the E53 generation, BMW being well known for its straight six petrol engines. They had brought diesels in, diesels were there, but they weren't that popular just at that point of inception for the X5. But the X5 was looking that way. It was looking at diesel, okay, and it was looking at it as a good answer, and it served it for 15 years through that first, second, and third generation. It served it well. But the second hybrid powertrains came in, and there was a little bit more of a negative view towards a diesel engine. You can see now the focus has gone over here towards the hybrid engine, and I think for this latest generation, it's what would make me say, yeah, that would be the one. If you can, there will be some concerns about it, so I completely get if you want to stick with the 3 litre, because a 3 litre just straight mild hybrid or just straight normal 3 litre, depending on what you have. I think almost all of them are mild hybrid, but if you stick with that, no one's ever going to turn around to you in a carriage and say, oh, you need a new battery pack, which is the fear that carries on for most plug-in hybrid used buyers and EV used buyers. So I can completely get that, and this is probably the last chance you're going to get to have something like a 6-cylinder diesel turbocharged engine that, although in the last generation and in the third generation, it's restricted. It's got, the diesel emissions fluid, the AdBlue, it's got sort of heavy DPF and catalytic converter and EGR and all this sort of stuff that is reducing the emissions and will need changing over time. But it could perform with it, and it does. So I can completely get, for many of you, the 3 litre diesel will still sort of hold root for that fourth generation. However, just be aware of the direction of a manufacturer, because it usually reflects how they're thinking towards their product. And in that third generation, we saw the first of that shift towards going hybrid. In the fourth generation, I think we've seen the completion of that, where they've sort of said, yeah, we'll keep that there, it's doing the job, and we know we have a customer base. Where we need to spend our effort and time is over here. And with the B58, they just knew they had a stellar engine from the start. So all they really needed was a good hybrid system. So my view, I'd go for the hybrid. But so if you said no, I've got to have a 3-litre diesel, fair enough. The one thing I would say, if you want big power, because some of you out there will be like, well, what about the X5M and X6M? Yeah, you can buy them on the last generation, but you know what? If you go for the hybrid, you've got a combined nearly 500 horsepower. And on modern roads where they're cracked, potholed, speed humped, and speed cambered everywhere, running more than 500 horsepower, if you can do that, then let me know where you live. It's probably Arizona or in the outback of Australia, or one of the other sort of parts of the world. Maybe you live on the Isle of Man and you like doing the Isle of TT rally replica, but in an SUV. Who knows? But there's only a few places in the world where I really think you could be enjoying using that. And that's why I think the 3-litre diesel was so popular for so many years, because people... I had a customer once, I'll tell you this story just before I go. And that's, I had a customer once and he came in and he was buying a Cayenne Turbo S. And he said to me, he said, well, him and his friend kind of have a view of the world. And bearing in mind, this was back in 2010, 2009. And he said, we have a view of the world that 500 horsepower is the minimum that we should have. As a car enthusiast, I'm not going to disagree with him. But 500 horsepower was his... So if it can have 480, 490, but that's where it had to start. I don't know that, you could have kept that view up, but it'll be costing you more and more money. And hey, more power to you if that's you. Go for the X5M then. But otherwise, no, I think the hybrid will do the job for you. I hope you've enjoyed this one. Fortunately, we haven't had too many interruptions. The dog, he seems happy, he's asleep. So if you did enjoy it, then consider liking, consider subscribing, and I shall see you in the next one.